Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in the second part of my review of the Supreme Court proceedings today, the afternoon session was Aiden ONeill QC, who was representing Joanna Cherry's case, which was successfully fought in the Court of Session in Scotland. So they were defending that position here. To begin with, actually, I thought he'd lost his senses, all senses. He was banging on like a proper little Rob Roy, going all Scottish nationalist. I thought, what's going on here? What's happening here? Eventually, Lady Black said, "You're going to get onto the issues. When are you going to get onto the issues?" And he said, "All right now." That was just the credits. It was like, I don't know, is there a new film coming out going to be about Robert the Bruce? He fancies the lead role. If so, I have to say, it looks a little bit old and fat to me, but whatever. But actually, I have to say that when I thought he'd taken leave of his senses, when he really got into it, he had some excellent points, really good points. And it was quite interesting, the difference in style and like perspective compared to Lord Panic yesterday. And I suppose that makes sense. The thing about the government advocates, they both covered a lot of ground because the government don't have a lot of ground to stand on. Essentially, the government's ground is it's none of the court's business. That's it. Whereas there are lots of lines of attack for the side who are opposed to the prorogation. Doesn't mean to say it's got more arguments and therefore it's going to win. That's not what I'm saying, but it does have more arguments. So Aiden O'Neill came from two different angles. First of all, the Scottish perspective, which was a little bit hit and miss, but there were some good points in it. And the other one was the constitutional outrage. So he first of all tried to say that, you know, the benefit of Scotland's Court of Session, for example, being several hundred miles away from London, it was outside of the Westminster bubble, which gave it a better perspective. I have to say, I thought that would be a bit of a misfire. I'm not entirely sure it's relevant, and if it is, it's a bit of a problem because the Northern Ireland Court is even further away, isn't it? Certainly a long way away from London. And the other thing is, you could then turn it round on its head and say, but that means you're also close to another assembly that at the moment is quite hostile to Westminster. So you're just as biased, but in a different way. So I don't think that necessarily helps, but he started with it anyway. Never mind. Let's get onto what he started to talk about when it was actually really good. So he did talk about the role of the Court of Session being to protect the Constitution and the role of the Supreme Court also being to protect the Constitution. He also described the Supreme Court as being like the fulcrum for the Union, because we have this strange situation in the UK. We have the law in England and Wales, the law in Scotland, the law in Northern Ireland. And, you know, you can have differences and therefore different approaches from the different courts. And it's up to the Supreme Court to determine, you know, which one has to take precedence. And this is where he said something interesting. I've come across this before, although it's not on that basis that I'm going to believe it. He said that in the UK, the highest standard prevails. So obviously the court in England and Wales, the High Court, said it's nothing to do with us. In Northern Ireland, they took the view this is nothing to do with us. In Scotland, they took the view this is absolutely to do with us. Parliament can't do anything about it, so obviously we're the only ones who can. And that's the highest standard. Now, the reason why I say just because I've heard it before is not how I'm taking it to be true, is this. There have now been 4 barristers making arguments on both sides to the 11 Supreme Court judges. And every time one of these barristers has said something questionable, they have been questioned. The judges are not shy about querying every little thing that's said. So when one of them makes a statement that is not queried, then I'm not a legal expert, but I'm going to take that as meaning they have got no query about it. So yes, the highest standard should apply. The highest standard would be the Court of Session, which has made a binding judgment already. That's not to say that the Supreme Court are going to uphold it, but that is a strong case, I would think. And what's the next point he made? So the next point was about parliamentary sovereignty. And this is, as I say, the constitutional outrage that he was coming across. So he said parliamentary sovereignty is the fundamental principle of the Constitution. And he said, you know, in this febrile atmosphere, this is being questioned. Which is true, isn't it? The start of Brexit was all about parliamentary sovereignty, which apparently we didn't have. But now once Parliament starts to exercise its sovereignty, those same people are fully behind shutting it down, denying them that sovereignty. So he's saying, well, hang on a minute. No, the courts have got to defend Parliament in this situation. It says Parliament has got no say on why or how long it's prorogued. It has the effect of impeding Parliament when the government is taking decisions that will fundamentally alter our country. This is not the same as, let's say, a government, it's sort of coming to the end of a session, it sort of wants another one, and then there's going to be a week where they're going to have to face a select committee they'd rather not face, so they decide to prorogue Parliament that week. That is proroguing Parliament for political advantage. That's been done before and it'll be done again. That's not what this is. This is prorogation for the specific purpose of altering the country in a way that when Parliament returns, it cannot reverse it. You know, I mean, the other thing I'll remind people of, because people will be thinking, well, it comes back with another, 2 and a bit weeks to go before the deadline. Boris Johnson has not promised not to prorogue right away after again. He could shut it down for the rest of October if the Supreme Court do not stop him. He was saying, O'Neill, it's not a question for the government of how many weeks it can get away with, it's what its effect and intent is. If Parliament can pass a bill in 2 days, how many could it do in 7? That's what he was saying the government were worried about, that Parliament would then start to enact all sorts of legislation to stop Boris Johnson doing what he wants to do. And Boris Johnson stomped on that. He had to let one bill go through, couldn't do much about it, but he needed to make sure they couldn't pass any others. He says prorogation done for an improper purpose and done in bad faith. This case was raised in July after leaks from well-placed Downing Street sources saying it was going to leave the European Union come what may. At the time, of course, they were told that, it's all hearsay, all speculation. Well, now it's not. Now it's happened, and it's happened exactly as it was predicted to happen. So he wants the court to find the suspension of Parliament to be unlawful on the basis of parliamentary sovereignty. And I think, this is what the point I was coming to in the video earlier today. It's this clash, isn't it, between the prerogative power of the government and the parliamentary sovereignty of Parliament. And if it's on a collision course, the one that has to step aside has to be prerogative powers. Parliamentary sovereignty is the cornerstone of our constitution. It always has to take precedence. Now, at this point, Aiden ONeill QC, who was the guy who led this same team when it was winning the case in the Court of Session in Scotland, he was tweeting. Now, bear in mind what I'm going to say here. Although he's a legal expert, this is not a point of law. This is a political statement, really. But it may be the view that the Supreme Court take, and of course we hope it is. He says, these points are biting because they speak to the Supreme Court's role as a constitutional court. There is a danger we allow ourselves to be confused into thinking this case is difficult. But the case is simple. A man with a mandate from 160,000 people seeks to suspend a parliament with a mandate from 46 million people because it opposes his will. Parliament is the supreme body in our constitution, but cannot stop him, so the courts must. That's it. O'Neill said precisely because Parliament has no say to when and how and what reason, that it's closed. That's why the courts have to take action. He said that the government have taken every day it possibly could out of parliamentary time, given the provisions of the Northern Ireland Act, which remember they amended before summer to stop them just doing it for the full September and October period. He said it's clever, but is it constitutional? He says it's important you do not give the government the benefit of any doubt, given the circumstances, the redactions, the lack of a sworn affidavit. He says we have no affidavit, we have no evidence. Notes the court was told redactions were said to be there for legal reasons. Now, bear this in mind. So the government have done two things which really cause you to question their honesty. First of all, they submitted some documents, clearly not a complete set of documents, with bits redacted to the Court of Session and the High Court. And they said that they were redacted for legal reasons. Well, it turns out at least one of those redactions was Boris Johnson calling David Cameron a girly swat. Well, there's no legal reason to redact that, is there? That's just his childishness. So clearly the redactions were not done for legal reasons, at least in all cases, so therefore they've lied about that. Then the lack of a sworn affidavit. If you're telling the truth, why not swear to it? Why not sign a document saying so? Don't want to. Don't even want to get the Cabinet Secretary to do it because they'd have to be cross-examined and their lies may be exposed. And that would be you're going to jail then. You are going to jail. Basically, if it weren't already clear, he's making the point Boris Johnson is a lying little bugger. And at this point, I'll have to reference the hospital visit. If you're not aware of it, if you follow me on Twitter, I think you will be aware of it. Always follow me on Twitter for like extra little frissons to these stories. So he went to a hospital in the northeast and was confronted by a parent who was none too pleased with him. And this guy was saying to Boris Johnson, "You're just here for a press photo opportunity." At which point Boris Johnson was saying, "There's no press here, there's no cameras here." They were right there. The guy said, "What's that?" Boris Johnson was recorded on camera saying, "There's no cameras here." They were right to his left. Now that is extreme, isn't it? That's beyond even Donald Trump. You know, Donald Trump has denied being with people or in places where there's photographic evidence that places him there. But this is Boris Johnson to a camera recording saying there's no cameras. And if this is the thing, if you're a Boris Johnson supporter, he's treating you like you're as thick as mince. I don't know how you put up with it. And a lot of people were attacking this fella because it turned out he was a Labour activist. Oh yeah, because he was a Labour activist, he magicked up the cameras, did he? They weren't actually there recording, or they were invisible, he just set them up. Absolute rubbish. The point is, Boris Johnson lied on camera about there being cameras there. Doesn't matter what this guy is. Doesn't matter whether he's a Labour Conservative, politically neutral. What he's saying was true. What Boris Johnson said was a lie. So then there was an interesting little bit. So he said, O'Neill said, look at the documents, the government documents. He says, but don't treat them as gospel. They are not the complete truth. So one of the judges, Judge Reed, was saying, when you say the complete truth, do you mean not the whole picture? And then O'Neill said, well, the document might have been written knowing that their decision to prorogue would be challenged in the courts and they might need cover. So then he said to the judge, my lord is looking perturbed and upset. To which Reed replied, I'm looking sceptical. And then O'Neill said, there's no reason to look sceptical. Look upset. But the fact is, read the documentation and it says, we know this will potentially cause us a challenge. We have no affidavit which says that this is true or complete. No affidavit which says that this is the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. One might not think that a government would engage solely in high politics as opposed to low, dishonest, dirty tricks, but I'm not sure we can assume that of this government, given the attitude which has been taken publicly by its advisers and by the Prime Minister himself to the notion of the rule of law, alluding to the fact that a number of ministers have said that they intend to break the law. Even Boris Johnson has said he intends to bend the law, which basically means break it and get away with it, doesn't it? So O'Neill then said, so look perturbed, look upset, but don't look sceptical. So then he says, so that the government think they can get away with anything until they're stopped. But that's not how it works. Everyone is subject to the law. No one has absolute power. So then he came on to what is the real crux of the argument, the thing that will get the Supreme Court on their side or not, justiciability. Whether the prorogation is a matter for the courts or purely political matter. So the government obviously believes it's not a matter for the courts. But he said, once Parliament has been prorogued, so once this has actually happened, the only constitutional actor still standing is the courts. So therefore, he said, it has to be for the courts to determine whether the power of prorogation has been exercised lawfully by the government because Parliament can't do it. It's suspended. I think the inference being, if Parliament was still sitting, you wouldn't have to have this case, other than potentially a hypothetical case, because Parliament could do something about it. But at the point at which it's suspended, it can do nothing about it. And then he went on to the idea of, obviously, this prorogation being for the purposes of facilitating a no-deal Brexit. So he says, there is no no-deal statute. The government have misdirected themselves. They have no authority to do this. You know, he said, there isn't statutory provision. There hasn't been a written law passed by Parliament for a no-deal Brexit. So what the government, he said, seems to have failed to understand in its reference to there being a no-deal Brexit is that there is no statutory provision which in any sense authorises the government to leave the European Union, with the inevitable effect that has on individual rights without a deal. There is no deal statute. So he said, one of the other reasons why this decision to prorogue is flawed is because it is based on an error of law. And this, I'm glad about this because I've been banging on about this for ages, haven't I? There is no legal basis for a no-deal Brexit in British law. In British law, it is not legal to go out without a deal without the expressed authority of Parliament. And I'm glad this has now been said in court. And again, I come back to my earlier point. Yes, this is someone who's arguing against prorogation saying it. It's a lawyer, but the judges didn't challenge that, which means the judges accept it to be true. You know, and so he says they've no authority. And finally, what he said, and it was a rather good line. I like this line. He said, I can't remember the exact word. He said, we mustn't let the mother of parliaments be shut down by the father of lies. It's rather good, isn't it? But anyway, that was Aiden O'Neill, the fiery Scots lawyer there. A very strange take on it. I thought he was a lunatic. I thought he'd gone completely rogue, I have to say. But I was assured by various experts that I was following that he is a QC not only in Scotland, but also in England and Wales. So he's a QC on both sides of the border. He knows how things work. He knows what he's doing. So it was a strange manner, but presumably just to counterpoint Lord Panic the day before, so that they come at it from two different angles, cover as much ground as possible, just in the hope that something sticks. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you'd like to support the channel further, then please click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.